Today is Tuesday, May 31st, and you're listening to the Beer Temple Podcast.
Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard, seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard, seen from again.
Hello, and welcome to the Beer Temple Podcast. I'm today's host, Mike Shalau from Is Was Brewing. I'm here with a very special guest, and also Serge fading us in. Good job, Serge, as always. We've got a version of our kind of a one-on-one conversation with some of my friends, the beers that changed our life, but I don't know if we're going to be talking too much about that today. But first, I should probably thank all of you for listening. I haven't been on in like a couple weeks, so I'm sure the last show was perfect, as they always are. And I want to thank WLPN for broadcasting us across the terrestrial airwaves. So our one-on-one today's guest was raised in Ohio. He matriculated from Faulkner University in Montgomery, Alabama, then went on to graduate with a master's degree in public and international affairs from the University of Pittsburgh. Shortly after graduating, he moved halfway across the world to China, a country he would call home for the next decade and a half. While in China, he founded Great Leap Brewing, a brewing out of buckets in a barber shop in a hutong in Beijing. It wasn't a barber shop technically, but we had a story about that one. From those buckets, he grew Great Leap into the largest independent craft brewery in China. He is easily one of the smartest people I have ever met in beer, but is also one of the most thoughtful and deepest feeling, two traits that are easily overlooked when one's intelligence burns so brightly as his does. He is a wonderfully loving husband and father, and someone I look up to and admire whether or not he likes it. He is someone who I am happy to have gotten to know and lucky to get to count as a friend. Everyone, Carl Setzer. Carl, how you doing? I think you're muted.
Yeah, because it was like the beginning and or the end of a Pixar movie, man. I am in tears.
I asked you if it was okay beforehand. That was a consensual.
Well, you said flowery. I should have understood that meant.
You know, it's strong like flowery.
Intentionally worded to pull on my heartstrings.
Yeah, I'm trying to gas you up, man. You've done some amazing things in your life.
Yeah, well, thank you for that very heartfelt intro. Let's get through this and see if everybody believes whether or not it's true.
Sure. So what's new? How are you? Where are you? What are you doing?
I am sitting in my backyard in Wickliffe, Ohio, and easily living the best year of my life.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I just turned 40 years young yesterday.
Congratulations.
And I got to spend that with friends that I've known for 30 years that my wife arranged into a surprise gathering that she also somehow got me to smoke enough protein for everybody to eat without me understanding that it was for a surprise party. So I don't know if I'm the smartest person. I don't know if I'm the smartest person that you know.
Your intelligence,
beer.
Yeah. She stroked your ego enough to get you to smoke.
Yeah,
a whole half of it.
She's never let me make the amount of meat that I want to make. And for some reason, it didn't ring any alarm bells.
I said,
just like, yeah, finally, I have agency in my marriage. I'm allowed to smoke as many beef ribs as I want now.
I said you were one of the smartest people I've met. I didn't say you were smarter than Lu Fong.
Hey, man, I'm smart enough to try to elevate my own status by slipping one in here and there. So whatever.
All right.
But yeah, no, everyone pales in comparison to the genius that is my wife. So, but yeah, man, things are good.
Good.
I am very happy to be where I am, and it is an honor to be a guest on your podcast.
Well, I don't know if it's an honor, but I'm happy to have you. So
Just two humble
let's
kids
both just back away
exchanging.
from any compliments
Hey,
either
whoa,
one
whoa,
give
whoa,
each other
whoa,
the whole
whoa!
time.
No one said this was going to be a compliment battle.
Right. No, I won that in the first 30 seconds. So
I was on mute, so technically I
right,
handicapped
you
it, but
couldn't hear
whatever.
it either. Um,
Sure.
so I guess we should start. You moved to China after going to grad school, correct?
I lived in China during like a gap year between undergrad and graduate school.
Hmm.
So the first year I lived in China was 0405. And that was easily one of those like, perfect time in my life to be completely blown away by something way more meaningful and ancient than anything I had experienced before. But at the end of that year, I kind of realized that, unless I had something to add to China, there was really no reason for me to just like participate as an English teacher or as, some sort of a tourist. So I made the decision to study Mandarin and get a master's degree and then see if I couldn't get, a job that was kind of allowing me to participate in the economic development, not just in how cool the culture seemed to a kid that was raised in the the shed waters of Lake Erie.
So in going over there with the intention to live for a while, did you know you were going to open a brewery, or was it just you were going over there and you were going to figure out what you were going to do?
I did. Yeah, I didn't. I didn't even drink until I was like 25. So the idea of like learning how to actually create, consumer alcohol was not something that I had dreamed of. It was just kind of something that Liu Fang, my wife, and I backed into. Just by, we did our honeymoon in Laos, and then we had the opportunity to do a business trip for the company I was working at the time to Europe. So I got to see her try like beer Lao, which is easily the best East Asian, Southeast Asian commercial beer in terms of quality and flavor. And it just kind of blew her mind that a country that was, to a Chinese citizen, Lao was like a backwards developing country. It's a third world country, right? And so for her, it was, really mind blowing that they could have such a beautiful expression of commercial beer versus what she was used to drinking in China.
Which at the
And
time
then,
was what exactly?
yeah, I mean, Qingdao, Yanjing, Pearl River, Snow, Harbin beer.
Which are all just
Those,
macro
the,
lager, right?
yeah, those are all the big five, really similar to what you would have found in America in the mid to late 70s, early 80s, in terms of like limited choice, very analogous, very low in ABV, fizzy, only good when it's cold type continental lager. And so getting to see her try beer Lao, and then I think it was about 2 months later, we were in Belgium for a business trip, and she was able to try not just like the big strong Trappist stuff, but also some of the full on acidic catalog of Lambic. And then I think that's also when she started really getting into just like drinkable, low acidity, Belgian style reds. And so like seeing her make that transition really fast to, hey, let's learn how to make beer, because if we just make something a little bit better than Chinese commercial lager, we could make some money, to 2 months later, just fuck that, let's try to make the best beer in the world. There's something really, pun intended, there's something really intoxicating about like a challenge, and like getting to view that challenge as an adventure with the love of your life in a place that, at the time, anything seemed possible. It was a very simple, it felt like a very simple decision to make. Let's just do this and see where it goes, because even if we fail, we're young enough, we can bounce back. Which is literally like why we named it Great Leap Brewing, because it comes from a poem about that, mentality, take a great leap when you're young and fat. Was a mantra for an entire generation,
Right.
of, Chinese, at the time, young people that were participating in these, various revolutions and civil wars. Liu Fang's grandfather is a really great example. He was the one that, recommended we name it that because he saw what we were wanting to do. It reminded him of how he felt when he was a part of something, whether it failed miserably or not. That's not why he joined it. He just wanted to see if he could, bring China out of what they considered like the century of humiliation. And so for him to like recommend a name that big, that meaningful, and for it to hit like right on the nose exactly what we were trying to do, it all kind of like fell into place.
It's incredible. And the first Great Leap was in Hutong, which is a kind of a small neighborhood in Beijing. How would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, Beijing was built and constructed to revolve around the Forbidden City and the seat of the emperor, right? So the closer you were geographically to the imperial palace, the more important you were. And so, that's why there's the second Tiananmen Square, then the second ring road, and then the third ring, fourth ring, fifth ring. Those are all representations of the growth of the city through the different, economic developments.
So it's like
But
Dallas.
anything that
I'm
is,
just kidding.
yeah, it's just like Dallas, or
Sorry, Dallas.
Columbus for you Ohio kids that love driving around and avoiding Columbus. But no, like the Hutongs were like a network of alleyways that kind of grew away from the imperial palace, and the entirety of the inner second ring road used to just be mazes of these alleyways with these beautiful courtyard residences that were all very insular, right? The guard stones next to the door gave you an indication of whether the inhabitant of the Hutong courtyard was a scholar or a government official / military. There was all this symbolism and meaning. And then when the People's Liberation Army occupied Beijing, after the KMT fled to Taiwan, they basically just like kicked in all these doors and did a reclamation of the properties and cut them all up and gave them to the soldiers that had fought in the revolution. And so what's left in Beijing for the Hutong districts is a very like scarred mosaic of what it used to be. And so it's got this romanticism about it that is like overwhelming for people.
Yeah.
But it's also an example of, Beijing before running water and before sewage and before electricity and before a lot of infrastructure. So, it's also a district that is very handy in understanding the like wage gap and the class disparity between the haves and the have-nots, because a lot of those courtyards are still inhabited by the descendants of the People's Liberation Army who have never been able to like get themselves elevated above the status that their relatives inherited when the government redistributed the land. Mm-hmm. And the other people that live down there are the ones who are rich enough to, acquire these properties, renovate them, and modernize them. And so, our position in that relationship of stakeholders was always fascinating to me. But the location that we found was an abandoned library or study of a mansion that had been cut up into residences for 36 different people. But when the local government was reclaiming property and redistributing it to the working class and the military class, the mansion that study used to belong to was owned by the former water administrator for that district. So somebody that had an immense amount of power. Mm-hmm. And so to make him lose the most amount of face possible, they took his entire residence away from him and left him with his books. And they made it a very, a public redistribution of property. Everybody in the area knew that the, once lofty government official was now left with nothing but a room with books, but no kitchen, no bathroom, no bedrooms, nothing. And so, we were fortunate enough to find a property that was pretty much untouched and not divided up. The courtyard was still exactly the same way they left it when they gave the property or forced the previous owner to just live there, which is really rare in how the history of all of that rolled down. We were very fortunate to find it.
And so you were making relatively small batches of beer out of this location, right? Like 20 liters or 100
No,
liters?
it was a 2-barrel,
Okay.
massive stainless steel stock pots that we modified with the help of a local engineer. But 2-barrel output, and then we had to divide it into food grade plastic, 1 barrel each, because I couldn't lift 2 barrels of beer into a
I mean,
refrigerator.
even lifting 1 barrel of beer into a refrigerator is pretty heavy. But
I'm a large guy, and at the
formidable.
time I didn't understand what it was doing to my lower back, and so
You do now.
I do now,
Yeah.
but I did not at the time.
And is this in the period where we met each other? Because I hadn't gone to China at this point. Were you still?
No, so this was 2010 when we opened to the public, and then we had the pleasure.
So that's even early for like American craft beer time. You foresaw a lot of this before even America started.
And most of again, right? It was that same feeling of we have to do it because it needs to be done. It wasn't like I was reading a one particular blog or even knew anything about American craft beer other than what I had kind of gleamed from being a consumer for 2 years at the time, right?
Right, you just saw it through your wife's eyes of being like, these things taste different than what I can get, and this is probably
it was more. We didn't know that we were going to be part of something. We just wanted to like make beer and have something that felt a little bit more tangible than some of the more like theoretical salaried positions that we were looking at, spending the next 10 years of our lives
something more authentic to do with your time.
Well, yeah, the romance of creating something with your own hands, I think, has driven a lot of people to make the decision to be a brewer, whether or not they get it right away or not.
You know me, I'm a subscriber to that.
Oh yeah. No, I you are an inspiration to even people that have been in the industry for 12 years now. There's a smarter, more in touch way to do it.
Less beer, more money.
And Mike is the example. We should all follow Mike.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. But yeah, I mean, when we first started, it wasn't necessarily because I had a bunch of heroes in America I wanted to emulate. It was really just because I liked what we were doing. I liked the symbolism of, making something from scratch in an environment that had, there was a great fire in Beijing probably 120 years before we started Great Leap, but that district itself had been around for, going on 900 years. And then the structures were rebuilt after that fire. And so like what we were part of just felt, like fitting, right? It was a very inspiring place to try to create something new using things that were symbolic of like Chinese cuisine culture. And so the overall like feeling of getting started was in 2010, I just kind of assumed that everywhere else already had better versions of what I was doing and China was just behind.
Mm-hmm.
But through our experience and through our journey, I kind of realized that, yeah, sure, there were generations of microbrewing and craft brewing that happened before. But anybody that started a brewery before Goose Island sold to, AB was doing it for the dumbest reason possible, right? It seemed like everybody I met that started after 2011, 2012
is a little smarter than us.
They all had their eyes on $1 billion, where like I just like the feels, right?
Yeah, we're coming all the way back around though, right? We're back to the feels if I'm proof of anything.
Well, Matthew McConaughey taught us all that time is a flat circle, and so we'll figure out how to do it better this time around.
That was a niche.
Nietzsche,
yeah.
Nietzsche. But yeah, man, like when by the time you and I met, it was, I think 2013. We met because Great Leap and Pipeworks did the first like China America collaboration beer in history. And so that was just like a fun thing that we threw together, not realizing that
Dixie Mission wheat, right?
The Dixie Mission, yeah,
with the ginger and honey. Is that?
Ginger and honey.
I
brewed on the old Pipeworks system where you still had to shovel out the lauter and dump it in a dumpster.
Yep. I remember you being very adamant that we pressure cook the ginger to avoid any clarity issues.
At the end of the day, man, none of us really knew what we were doing until we knew what we were doing, and that I didn't know what I was doing until like 2014. So yeah,
And I remember making fun of you many times after this that Kate taught you about pH and mashing.
yeah. I mean,
this
like,
will make sense later when we figure out like how it. Never mind.
the shame that I felt that day lasted until like 2019 when you grabbed me and you were like, "Hey, man, like we learned about pH like 2 days before you got there." So
Yeah, it was probably about a month. We were stoked on pH because we had just started figuring out what it meant, how to use it.
I remember walking away from that going, I gotta get my shit together. That was the most humiliating. Like, well, how much is your pH? I think I just responded with all of it, all the pHs.
Yeah, the right one.
I try to get as many pH into the beer as I can.
I get double dry pH the beer. I think
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
No, I think we had learned about pH literally like a month or two before we were doing a collaboration with Tired Hands, and we put lime in it, and they're like, "What's the pH? Well, let's get the knockout pH of this." And I remember getting a very dirty look from the guy who was the head brewer at the time of Pipeworks when he took the pH meter. I'm like, "Oh, sick! We've never used this before."
we've all participated in the never-ending parade of faking it until we make it.
I'd say it's still going.
Yeah, but some of us stuck in, some of us stuck out, but that parade is 24/7.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, like I think the overall feeling of like that first 2 or 3 years was, it was all about feel, right? Because it was really small batch. If anything was wrong, I just dumped it down the drain and did it again. There were a lot of limitations to that house and what we could do and how much we can grow. But pretty much every opportunity I got to try and educate myself and learn from other people and not feel as dumb as I felt that day that we did that collab. I think
I'm glad we made you feel dumb. That was
well, my success rate of like taking full advantage of the opportunities that, like that intro of like, this is Carl, he's got a brewery in China. Like that opened a lot of doors that I think a lot of other brewers probably wished they had that privilege or that access to, just because there was a novelty to what I was doing and people just kind of wanted to hear the story and kind of like catch the wave, because China was in the news all the time back then, not for like the shitty stuff that's going on now, but
right.
because of the optimism and the growth and the like unparalleled economic development and all of those things. And so all the exposures I got and all the opportunities I got to like reach out and work with other people and travel and like sit and listen to other people talk about the challenges they kind of butted up against. I tried to absorb as much of it as I could, because it was really like the reason why we were able to grow as quickly as we did was because, Kate knew about pH and I didn't.
That's right. So it all is, as everything is attributable to Kate.
That's right. Kate Branken knows this, and it's really irritating because the way she looks at you is very much like, it's all because of me, Carl.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
She feels that way. I've talked to her about it a lot. So after that, you opened 2 more kind of like brew pub style locations in Beijing. Is that right?
Yeah. So 2013, after we did our collab, was when like our second location was finally like hard open officially to the public. So that late summer, fall and winter were really like the moment where, you move up to like a 10-barrel brew house and, a mixture of 20s and 10s in your cold block, and then an entire cellar of, brighting capacity that you just didn't have when you were, brewing in stock pots and plastic buckets or on, 30-year-old equipment that you like threw together at a farmhouse at the foot of the Great Wall, or whatever we had done up to like the 2013 mark was small enough output that if it wasn't right, we could dump it and it didn't kill us.
Right.
But once we got up to like a 250 seat brew pub and a full kitchen and, 45 employees and an entire grain to glass setup, it started to become really clear that, education and, tacking more towards the science and the technical side of brewing, and kind of getting away from like the alchemy, everything's magic shit.
What do you
Was the
mean
more
that's
important.
not real?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
I
What do you
don't know.
mean wizards don't come in and make the beer delicious?
That's right.
So yeah, like 2013 was the watershed year where we like really also kind of blew people's minds in Beijing. They just kind of thought we were going to do another like cool, quaint little hole in the wall spot that was going to be, the place to be 7 months out of the year. And what we did was we opened a brew pub that you could literally pick up and drop in New York City or London or anywhere in Copenhagen, and people wouldn't like miss a beat, right? We were aiming for setting a standard for expectations for Chinese craft beer.
And it was incredible. I can speak from personal experience that
Thank you.
they were as good, if not better, than brew pubs I've been to anywhere in the world. Both the beer, the food, and the aesthetic.
You know just what to say. Well, like the success that we had there, the success that we had at that spot put us on our heels. We were not expecting, 7 days a week, lines out the door at 7 p.m. and 3 or 4 turns every night, regardless of Monday or Sunday, Monday or Friday or Saturday. Yeah. And so we immediately started looking for another location, found another spot that was, maybe 160 seats when it was done, put another brew house in it, made the choice to do just 3 20 barrel fermenters and some single shell bright tanks and a walk-in, and kind of moved the volume portfolio to the third location, and then use the second location to just brew variety. And that's when we really realized that like no matter how many of these we open, we're not really gonna meet the demand that's out there, even with like other craft breweries opening in Beijing and it getting more and more popular nationwide. We really kind of started to understand in 2015 that there was something here that, if done correctly, would shock even the larger craft brewery like pillars in America.
Right.
And so again, like all of it was just, let's see how far we can go. Let's see what else we can do. When is the market going to tell us to stop? When are our bodies going to tell us to stop? When's the government going to tell us to stop? When is somebody going to tell us to stop? And so, without those breaks or without those governors, we just kept growing and growing and expanding because it just seemed like the only thing we should be doing.
I think this is the point where I first came over to Beijing to see what you were actually doing. Does that sound about right?
I think around 2016, 2017, you guys came and represented Pipeworks at our like big Beijing and invitational beer fest, which
was the first time I had ever been to China, and mind blowing for me. It was I'd never been to a city that big in Beijing, and I don't know if anyone, most people haven't been to a city that big, and I guess in America, people from America haven't been at least. And to see what you guys were doing was pretty incredible, and to go to a beer festival with these breweries from all over the world and see people interacting with our beers halfway across the world was pretty incredible. I remember a specific instance. We were pouring next to Beguile, which is now my host brewery for the project, the Iswas project, and someone came up and they poured them a barrel-aged barley wine, and the woman sipped it. I was like, "Oh my god, this is incredible!" Like didn't say it. I facial expression said this, and then knelt down to give a sip to her 2-year-old child that was in a stroller. And that was an indelible image in my mind of like, I don't even know if this is okay or not, but I'm experiencing something new.
Beijing was a hell of a city for sure.
It was. I'm so happy I got to go. I don't know. I'm sure it's different now, but and I thank you for inviting us. But so between the time I went there that first time, and the second time, you alluded to it, you scaled up pretty significantly. I remember going on a bus trip. Beijing is what, 60 million people officially?
The Beijing, Tianjin, Hubei corridor, which is like Tianjin is a city of 15 million. Beijing metropolitan jurisdiction is 22 million. and then the Hubei province, makes up the rest.
Yeah.
But it's about 60 million people within a 150-mile radius.
Right. So the way that I present this to people when I'm telling the story about it is we're in Beijing, which is 20 to 25 million people. We go on like a 45-minute bus ride. How long is that bus ride?
We
got a little lost. I don't know.
It pushed about 2 hours, but it went by fast because you were with friends.
That's right. Okay, so 2 hours. If you go 2 hours outside of any city in the United States, you're in a town of like what, maybe 60,000 if you're in you're going the right direction from the right place.
Sure.
We end up in a place that's 15 million people, and then you show us your brewery, and your brewery was incredible. It was big, it was beautiful, it was ambitious, and I think everyone, and Pipeworks, people think Pipeworks is a big brewery. There are much bigger breweries on this tour as well, and they were equally impressed with what you were doing, to the point where the thing that blew my mind the most was the Petainer blower. You had, because there isn't much draft beer in China, you had the kegs would get blown on site. At least that was the plan, correct?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the amount of thought and market research we had to do to even like raise the money to build that brewery.
Right. Because
a lot of it I've forgotten, because it's. I mean, I'm 3 years out from being like, since I was physically at that brewery.
Mm-hmm.
So you're bringing back memories of the things we accomplished, but
I hope it's okay.
Really
if anything is uncomfortable or
fine.
upsetting,
No,
you can let me know.
Yeah, there's a drone flying above me, but other than that, I don't know if you can see it.
I can see it, actually.
There you go. Yeah,
that's
so
me.
Like basically the hardest question to answer when trying to design a craft brewery for like a production brewery in Asia is most production breweries get a lot of their bread and butter and a lot of their profits off of draft beer sales. But there's no keg craft, there's no microstar, there's no keg rental. You either buy your cooperage fleet or you don't sell draft beer.
Mm-hmm.
And so we, had raised enough money to have a end-to-end Cronus installation from, grain handling was Bueller all the way to Cronus for the brew house, the fermentation, the processing, and then the packaging. And so we knew that we had the capability to do, the equivalent of 12-ounce and 16-ounce aluminum cans. But I wanted to prove that you could do drafts.
Because that's not a cultural thing, right? That's not like people in America are like, oh, every place has at least a couple of handles, right? That's not really the case.
It's all about the infrastructure, right? And if there's no reason to invest in your infrastructure, no one's going to invest in that. Having a cold box, having, any type of FOB panels all the way to faucets, glycol cooled lines, any of that. Like I had to fly Bill Martin from Superior Refrigeration in Chicago, Illinois, to China to do the draft installation for our second location, because there was no one in China that knew how to do draft service or draft designing, draft infrastructure, or teaching me how to service it or do installations on my own. Right, there was just nothing. Right. And so flying Bill Martin out, air freighting the end-to-end install for that draft system, and then shadowing him was still cheaper than having a guy from Cornelius fly out from the UK and do it.
Right.
And so that was just one of those like little things that people in the industry, especially in the Great Lakes region, take for granted. Is like, you need something, you pick up the phone. When I needed something, I had to beg, borrow, and like bend over backwards to be able to facilitate something as simple as like 20 faucets. And so answering the question of like, how do I encourage draft sales out of a brewery that, from day one could do 80,000 barrels a year and at max capacity could do 500,000 barrels a year, was like a big problem to answer, because a lot of investors and a lot of market watchers just didn't believe that craft beer could survive in China without draft accounts, and there was no solution to the logistics of filling draft beer into stainless kegs, sending them out, and then ever getting them back.
Right.
That didn't also just have the assumed loss per year of like 5 to 8% of your cooperage just falling off of a truck.
Right.
And so, understanding what Europe was working on through, more environmental motivations, trying to figure out, is PET greener, or, is it more green or less green than stainless cooperage that's got to, be transported, dead weight coming back, wastewater production for cleaning, all of those things. And so I just started like attending conferences that were run by the Technical University of Berlin or Dumans or whoever, right? Whoever would have like an annual conference in Asia somewhere once a year. I would go and sit and listen to the speakers and the panels and try to figure out like what is something that could solve that problem for China. And what I settled on was just cold calling Patainer in the UK and saying, hey, do you guys give a shit about the China market? And their reaction was very enthusiastic.
No.
They immediately started talking about doing a joint venture. And I went from like solving my own problem to then potentially being the joint venture partner for one of the largest, one-way single-use keg producers in the world, to try to help them enter into the China market. And so a lot of those things were just because I had a question I had to answer. And I wouldn't give up until I found a solution.
So basically a long way from learning about mash pH, huh?
Yeah, I feel like, from 2013 when I was embarrassed until 2018 when you saw that brewery, I made the most of my time. Yeah. If my goal was to learn about brewing, I did the best I could, Mike.
You absolutely did.
I tried real hard.
But we slightly glossed over it, but you built a brewery that upon opening had the capacity to do 80,000 barrels a year and could go up to at least 500,000 barrels a year.
Yes.
And so that's big. That's a big brewery.
It was
doing it basically with no. In America, it's very easy to be like, I'll just call up this guy who's a little bit bigger than me and he'll help me. But you didn't really have that, right? You had to kind of recruit people from the big boys, from all over, from people building breweries in places that breweries don't usually go, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up, in that like pursuit of like being able to answer questions and being able to solve problems. You like, if people see that you're genuine and you're actually trying to do something because you believe in it, not just for the normal reasons of, a quick ROI or, self-promotion or whatever, people tend to be very, drawn to that and are very generous in making further introductions or, answering the phone when you call if you've got a question that you can't answer. And so, the team that we put together for that expansion included, people that like domestic hires that were, the head of quality assurance and quality control for the largest malting company in the world, Kofco Malts out of Dalian. And then, shift brewers that had gotten really frustrated with, the corporate culture at some of the larger commercial breweries. We built our lab around a bunch of people that ABI fired from their diagnostics department because, revenues weren't great in 2017. And so the first department to get the axe was quality control, which was like, hey, if you guys don't need them, I'll give them a job. That's total thank you for firing them. And they ended up being some of the, like those bedrock type workers that when we got all the way up to like the licensing, where it's not just like a friendly guy comes by and like kicks the can and sees what's going on, but like a delegation of very stern looking compliance officers who want to fail you. But they see that your reporting and your record keeping and your archives and your SOPs are all up to their standards, if not a little bit beyond. It's all because of, when I went out and recruited people, they saw what I was trying to do and they knew how hard it was going to be, but they also believed in, establishing some sort of a like next generation, consumer good that was lower output but higher margin, and that attracted the new middle class of like Chinese beer drinkers.
Less beer, more money.
What's up?
Less beer, more money.
It was philosophy. It was a macro version.
Yeah, it was
of what is was.
It is a further extrapolated version of the less beer, more money was philosophy.
Like at the same time, I'm also realizing that like what I want to do in China is not something that anyone in China has ever done before. So my ability to recruit people that can really like lead that type of an operation and a project was limited domestically. It was limited internationally, to be honest. And so, I wanted to deploy, a hammer mill and mash filter. I didn't want to use a lauter ton. And so that immediately limits your scope of international,
Right.
directors of brewing operations who would get like, A, why are you doing that? And B, I've worked on those systems before. This is what we can do and this is what we can't do. And so I was fortunate enough to, be accepted as a member to the VLB at the Technical University of Berlin. They nominated me to be on their like Technical and Scientific Congress, which is like a huge thing for anybody. I think I took Mitch Steele's seat when he left for
So nobody.
Huh?
A nobody?
Yeah, just some guy.
Wrote the book on hops, but who's he?
Right. I'm not by no means saying that I'm his peer, but
You're saying you're his superior. They replaced him with you.
They
upgraded.
An opening. They had that opening, and they were like, "Who's the closest guy to us right now?" And I was standing right there, and they were like, "That guy."
And you're eating like a finger sandwich in the corner. Yeah.
He's got a beard and a forearm tattoo. Get him over here.
Yeah. Is that a tri-clamp, sir? Yes, you're in.
Right. So yeah, like through that, I was able to like meet eventually the woman that I recruited to run that entire brewery, like the planning from P&ID drawing and pre-visibility all the way through to the commissioning. And that was Vipka Hensa. She was, at the time I met her, she was working for Guinness. She had just, been on the team that commissions the new, they call it the triplet, right? The 3 parallel line 1,000-barrel brew houses that they dropped at St. James Gate. And because she did such a great job with that, they offered her a position as a global brand governance manager, which is somebody that, when a satellite brewery that makes Guinness runs into a problem and they're not able to hit their KPIs, they request for an expert to come out and fix everything. And that was Vipka's job. And so she was on call to go and, work very closely with all of the African breweries that were brewing Guinness at the time. All of them were, mashing sorghum. All of them had mash filters, and Vipka and I hit it off right away. Her husband is part of our family, mutual friend. So it was a very
he's actually
quick.
His lineage is from the town that my bloodline comes from, like not far from it.
Which
we found out, we looked very much alike, and we found out in the course of doing this festival that, like, my surname comes from like 15 minutes from where he grew up,
which is another. Kate's responsible, Mike's responsible. It all goes back to that first collab beer.
That's right.
But yeah, so Vipka, she and I met in like 2015, and I was very persistent in, I think I offered her the job in like 2016 or 2017 before there was anything to offer. I knew that I needed somebody that was used to working in less than like comfortable like environments, and really got like the challenge of trying to do something world class in an environment that maybe doesn't even want it yet. And so like asking Vipka to join the team was something I did very fast, and then her deciding to join the team took like 3 years. And so again, it's more of a persistence thing than anything.
Yeah, I mean, you did a great job because she's one of the most impressive people I've ever met. Like, just incredible. And I mean, I only met her, obviously for like 3 or 4 days in my entire life, but the amount of knowledge you could tell she had and the way she was able to effectively deploy it and communicate it was pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think, like the the meaningfulness for Liu Fang and I of like building the team that we built is the story for us. Like post 2012, 2013, it's not really even about like, and then we did this recipe and then we did this and we want to medal at this thing. Like we just talk about the people
Yeah.
that because it's a validation, right? It's like, oh shit, what we're doing is, something that is attracting like world class talent, and we're right at that precipice of the means of production, the right team, and then like that the portfolio of beers that we had, the retail network that we were operating. The bigger we got, the more we could like use that as a lighthouse and try to like go out and recruit, even talent that's even less likely to come to China, as odd as that sounds. But like, no one recruits brewers out of Guinness to be brewers somewhere else unless it's Carlsberg. Usually they stay there for their entire life and then go work for like a whiskey distillery or open a whiskey distillery. It's very rare to have somebody that's in the brewing division at Guinness leave to like walk away and brew beer for somebody else, let alone somebody in China. And then like by 2018, 2019, we recruited Fulan Xin to leave War Pigs in Copenhagen, which is like if you're a nerd, it's like the pinnacle, right?
Sure.
To be the
coolest
brewmaster at War
international,
Pigs, right? To be like the brewmaster at like the hub of all collaboration beers and beer festivals and like hip, cool Scandi culture. But she saw what we were doing. She saw the meaningfulness of it, and like who else was, working with us on our team and what we wanted to do. And what we wanted to do was like, show through like brute force that like the best beers in the world can be made in a place that the rest of the world just assumes can't do it. And we're going to prove that to be true. And everybody else is going to realize it too late, or they're going to see what we're doing and they're going to try to emulate it. That was kind of the momentum that we had like 2018, 2019 going into 2020, was just because of the people that were joining the team and because of the ability, the things that we were able to accomplish in that like last 5 years of operating the business that, like this is the proof. We're doing it.
Yeah.
The momentum's there. And then obviously like the entire world just screeched to a halt for COVID-19.
When you look
changed a lot of people's lives.
When you look back on that growth phase, is there a singular moment that you can remember being your favorite, your most accomplished, your like, wow, this is the thing that's working, or does it make me?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot, right? But the big ones that jump to my head are, like pulling the first couple of cans off the canning line while Cronus was commissioning it, and like standing there in this massive hall with Liu Fang and Vipka and like trying those beers, and because you don't know until that like first can comes out
right.
whether or not you did it right. Your lab can tell you that you're doing it right. The sensory panels that you're running every other day can tell you you're doing it right, but it's not until something gets put inside of a can and you crack one open and try it that you kind of like calm down.
And what did that feel like to you?
For me, it felt like relief, but then I looked and I saw Liu Fang and I was like, this is what we've been working for, right? It's like the look on her face. It was just generations of her family getting shit on by fate, by government policy, by, just the march of history. It was, knowing that she had been raised by her grandparents because her dad passed when she was 6, knowing that her grandfather was illiterate until the day that he passed, but he still made it. Like, that's that kind of like, I can't afford to fuck this up type feeling.
Yeah.
Because it felt like my people, like her family felt like my family.
Yeah.
And like seeing her drink out of that can for that first time was one of those, like, I didn't waste the opportunity. I didn't squander this. I didn't cut corners. I did it the way that I knew it had to be done. And like seeing the look on her face was all I needed. And so I would say that that's the moment, right? There were a bunch of other things that are like feathers in your cap, but it's like the person that you're doing this with, and like she was doing it for me, I was doing it for her, and for us to stand there and to just feel that moment of pride was, nobody can ever take that away from me.
That's beautiful, Carl. It's really wonderful.
Well, I had to do better than your fucking intro, so you got me.
That's much better than my intro.
You pulled it out of me like Diane Sawyer.
Yeah, that's me. I mean, it's profound and it's meaningful.
Sure.
Yeah, and so then I don't want to be like, and then what happened? But
and then what happened?
Welcome back to the Beer Temple Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Shallow from Iswas Brewing. I'm here with Carl of Cleveland. Carl, how you doing?
I'm still good.
Good.
Still in Cleveland. Still good.
Where we last left off, you have constructed the best keg blowing facility in China that happened to also be one of the largest independent craft breweries. And what year was that?
We got our full licensing book in July of 2019.
2019.
And so, the construction of that brewery was awesome, but I think 6 weeks in after we broke ground, we got a notice from the local government saying that, I think we got the notice on September 20th, and it said October 15th, all construction in China is banned until March 15th for pollution control. And so even like the construction and the build out for the brewery that you saw, like it couldn't just be fucking normal. It couldn't be like we started, there were some hiccups, we solved the problems, we were smart on our feet, and then we started brewing beer. Mm-hmm. It was, we started, and then 5 weeks later they told us we couldn't buy concrete or steel or bricks or have trucks on site or pay any workers to be on site for 6 months. And so like even through that, like we didn't lose the momentum, we didn't lose the vision of what we wanted to do. We were able to move things around, make sure that anything that we were working on was within like their very tight description. It could be quote unquote renovation work that's inside as long as all raw materials are on site. We were fortunate enough to have like 5 weeks to get everything we needed to make sure that we could move along, even though it felt like we were limping along. And so like by the time March 15th rolled around, we were able to hit full throttle. And I think we brewed the first beer right around my birthday at the end of May. And then once we had beer in cans, we could send them to the national lab and they could do the testing. And that took 3 weeks. And then once we got the, report of all, of like hygienic status from the beer that we brewed, then they would send a delegation to like walk around, very much like Kim Jong-un pointing at things. There would be like a leader who would like have a furry hat with a badge on it, and he would point at a thing, and then one of my people would have to explain to him exactly what that was, and he pretended to understand what they were saying.
Yes.
And then that does look like a homogenizer. Mm-hmm. And so once we finally got the ability to submit all of the reports, whether it was third party or people that came on site to do audits from the government, then it was as like unsatisfying as like standing at a window in a bureaucratic office, handing them a stack of paper and them leafing through to make sure everything was stamped and in order, and then they just yelled through a squawk box, come back in 4 business days for your license. And so by the time we had the licensing, we were able to, full throttle, distribute nationwide. Beer with that license could be exported. We had our ISO audit scheduled. We had a version of, a HACCP plan for international distribution for like the USDA and all of the other foreign governments that would want to come and do site audits of a food production facility that was going to send packaged goods to their country. And so we were getting all of those ducks in order through the fall. And then, once the winter rolled around, we saw sales for the distribution product. We saw sales kind of lag a little bit because we were going into November, December. And so we just kind of decided, you know what, we've got everything that we need to get us through the winter. And so, it's okay if things dip a little bit. That's what happens in the industry. And so we're just very happy with our team. We did an end of the year party. We were also building out our 5th retail location in Chengdu, which is in Sichuan province, which is, from Beijing to Sichuan. It's like going from like Chicago to San Antonio. And so it was a very aggressive push to put a branded Great Leap brew pub in a city that wasn't Great Leap's home. And so we just felt all that momentum. We were feeling pretty good. We were looking at locations, I shit you not, in Wuhan. I was in Wuhan on Christmas Eve of 2019. I was at Devil's Brew Pub with my buddy, who's the owner and brewmaster there. And he was slammed because it was Christmas Eve and everybody was out drinking craft beer. And he walked up to our table and he was like, "Hey, man, how's it going?" And I was like, "Oh, man, it's going good." He was like, "Did you hear about the new SARS?" And I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" He was like, "Oh, yeah, man, there's a rumor going around Wuhan that there's an outbreak at a hospital. They're calling it like the new SARS, but, whatever. They should, I think, it have things like that like pop up every once in a while in China because it's just such a massive, densely populated country. Inner Mongolia had an outbreak of the bubonic plague like 3 months before COVID kicked off in Wuhan. And so these types of rumors were fairly common. Mm-hmm. But I just remember it feeling a little bit different. Like, oh shit, this is where SARS started the first time. Like that was a non-trivial interruption to people's way of life. I hope it doesn't get that bad. And then we flew Christmas morning we took the high speed from Wuhan down to Chengdu Christmas morning. We were in Chengdu for a couple of days checking on our location. By the time we got back to Beijing, Liu Fang couldn't get it out of her head that there was like a viral outbreak in Wuhan. That's never a good sign. So she was looking online. She was finding a lot of WeChat groups and things that were, blowing up with information, and then sensors would scrape it all out. We just kept it in the back of our head. I had a sales and distribution visit to a big distributor in Southeast China in Guangzhou, and so I went down there, did the sales call with Tina Huang, who you met in Beijing a couple of times. Mm-hmm. We were feeling pretty good. I had tickets to see Dave Chappelle in Bangkok, and so I flew from Guangzhou to Bangkok, saw Dave Chappelle and Michelle Wolf, and then flew from Bangkok to Chengdu to hire a sales guy and be there for the grand opening of that location. By the time I got back to Beijing, it was January 7th, I want to say. And then everything stopped. Yeah. I think I was in Beijing for like 48 hours. Wuhan got shut down. Beijing shut down maybe 3 days later. No one knew what was going on. The rumor was that it was just like a aggressive form of pneumonia. They hadn't even stopped calling it like new SARS or SARS-2. The government was still saying that there wasn't anything going on. And then by the time like Beijing really locked down, it was leading into Chinese New Year. And so they kind of got away with it, right? Because you're going into a massive government holiday anyway. But like we were getting notices from the government in Tianjin saying you're not going to reopen after Chinese New Year. You're not going to reopen until we tell you you can. And then we started getting the same notices in Beijing. So right around mid-January is when everything kind of slammed shut. We were able to keep one location open, the newest one in Beijing, because it was far enough outside the city. It was like outside the 4th Ring Road, which they deemed as like not densely populated enough to really matter. But everybody was really cautious about going out anyway.
Right, and shutdowns in Beijing were more intense than they were here, right? Like that.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't allowed to leave our apartment for 3 weeks unless we were going to pick up food at the front gate of the apartment because they weren't letting delivery guys come into the compound. Yeah. And so they just kind of like had these dudes and there's never a shortage of dudes in like North China. There's always like guys hanging out. And so those guys were like recruited to be the temperature checker at your apartment complex, but like didn't no real formal training of using a thermometer and no real investment in performing his job. So it all really felt like theater.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until February 10th when Liu Fan got a text message from the local hospital. We were, 4 months pregnant at the time. And so we were getting ready to go in for the big ultrasound and like see the baby and all of that. And we got a notice from the Public Health Administration in Beijing saying like all non-essential services are canceled. And that counted prenatal care, which to me just like you get to a certain point of, all right, the greater good. All right, we all got to throw in. We don't know. We just want to come out of this at the other end type of a vibe. But when they were like, your unborn child doesn't matter, yeah. I had watched Robbie for 3 weeks struggle with why can't I go back to school? What did I do wrong? I just want to see my friends. And then like when we got that text message from the government, I was kind of like the American in me was just like, fuck this. And so we got the message from the government on February 10th. We were, feet on the ground in Cleveland by February 12th. It was just kind of like, we'll leave everything behind. It'll get uncrazy soon. And then we'll figure out what to do.
Wow. And
so we kind of washed up on shore with like 3 carry-ons, an 8-year-old Robbie and, an unborn Levy. And so like, I was really just trying to make sure everybody was comfortable and calm. Oh, we'll go and get like a long-term Airbnb up on the lake in Lake Erie out in Ashtabula County, which is kind of, the sticks way up in between Cleveland and Erie, Pennsylvania. I had spent time there, like, when I was being homeschooled in high school. And so I knew the area. I knew a lot of the people. And so, but I was freaking out internally because it's like, what am I doing? Like, I just invested 16 years of my life, and not to mention all this money, and built this brewery and have 230 employees and an unborn child and all of that. So it was just like crushing. But I also just had to be like the fun dad who's just on an adventure, because I didn't want Robbie to have anxiety. I didn't want, Liu Fang and I would talk about it in private. But like during the day, it was, let's go to the state parks. Let's go to the county parks. Let's go throw rocks into Lake Erie. Let's, just kind of be as active as we can. And then we'll hold up in our Airbnb and be safe and have a fun family moment. And then like Shaun of the Dead, it'll all just kind of work itself out. Right. Yeah. It'll all blow over. And so we were in that.
So at that moment,
situation,
your intention was to go back to China and have the baby born there.
Well, I mean, no one knew what was going to happen, obviously.
Yeah. Right.
But I knew that we couldn't sacrifice. Liu Fang and I had sacrificed so much, right?
Right.
You don't think about it when you're an entrepreneur and your business is growing, but I didn't see my son enough. My own personal health was going to shit. My gout was out of control. I had severe stomach acid from the pressure and the anxiety and the poor diet and the lifestyle and all of that. I was overweight. I didn't feel good. And so, like when it was, I can do that to me. But to ask us to fly blind with an unborn child during like what was turning into a global pandemic was something that, it's just like, we'll figure it out one day at a time. We'll figure it out. We'll, we trust our team can do this without us. We want to be here, but they're going to understand because of, the situation with our pregnancy, that we would let them make the right decision. And so us making the right decision didn't seem selfish.
Yeah.
And so, that feeling of like washing up on shore, obviously I had a lot of privilege. I was from here, white dude, but there's all this news about anti-Asian hate. And so I'm just like ready for more fuckery. Right. I'm going to get off the plane and somebody's going to say something to my wife, and it's just going to all be an extension of like the last 13 years of our marriage. And where, like, you know, we had those situations in China a lot because there is, you know, animosity towards, you
the
know,
other direction though, towards you, right?
Right. But also towards her, because
Right.
she's the race trader.
Right.
She married outside of, you know, she went outside of her lane, and he hasn't taken her away yet. And so now they're just rubbing it in our face type of a vibe. But you're also not legally, you're not allowed to like defend yourself if you're a foreigner in China. If you're a foreign passport holder and you get into a fight with a Chinese person, even if they instigated it, you're going to get deported because it's just zero tolerance.
Right.
And so a part of me was also like, you know, the last 13 years been all pent up. Now I'm going to Ohio. Somebody says anything to my wife, I'm going to beat the shit out of them. And
I'm allowed to now. Yeah. I'm from here.
In my mind, I was like, yeah, that'll make it worth it.
You're beating up every guy who said anything to you for the last 16 years.
Right.
Yeah.
But then obviously, like, we get here, I'm on edge, but I'm trying to just maintain and be everything that my son needs and everything that my wife needs and everything that I need. Right.
Yeah.
And then everybody let me down. Everybody was the nicest motherfucker to Liu Fang that you could possibly imagine, whether I was around or not. Like, I didn't even get like these anecdotes where like I was in and they said it was nothing. It was just like, yeah, everybody's really nice to me. And I was like, well, Liu Fang, try harder, because this is not, this isn't as satisfying. Knowing that like people are good deep down is not as great as I want it to be.
It affirms the things you were most scared of, that most people are actually good.
Tons of bitches. Yeah, it was tough. It was a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
But all kidding aside, man, it was a very disruptive and very abrupt decision that had to be made, and there was no other thing that we could have done that would have been as safe for our family.
What was that 48 hours like? Like you said, there were 2 days between when you realized you couldn't get the care you needed for your unborn child to when you washed up on the shores, as you were saying. Like, did you? It was the two of you making decisions together.
An adventure novel for like young Christian teens, basically. It was like running from communist China, getting my wife to the safe.
It's an 80s
shores
movie
of freedom.
Yeah,
but like we made the decision. She got the text. We talked about it for 30 minutes. It was a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
We called Deepka, we called Tina, we called Chen, we called all of our like management, and we're like, listen, we have to do, like, this is not something, we can't fuck around with this. And they were like, no, we got it, just go. You know, everything here will be fine. We don't know what's going to happen either, but we know what we're doing, and it's fine. You guys can go. And so trying to find flights, because there were no direct flights from China to America at that point. And it was kind of a gray area because Liu Fang and we were married, but she didn't have a green card. So we didn't know what like Trump's travel ban was going to do.
Right.
So a lot of it was spent like talking to lawyers in Hong Kong and here, just to be like, hey, what is the worst thing that can happen if she gets on the plane, or if we arrive in America and they don't let her in? And so we're just trying to figure out like, all right, we need to have our Chinese marriage licenses with the notarized English translation. We need to have Robbie's consular birth certificate because Liu Fang's name's on it. And then we just need to hope that we get the right guy in the right mood and hope for the best. But then getting tickets were like, it was, I think our options were Tokyo, I want to say Poland, Russia, and one place in the Middle East. There were only 4 airports that we could transfer through that would have let all of us transfer.
Mm-hmm.
But she had a resident visa for Taiwan for when we were living there a couple of years before that we kept renewing. And so we were like, oh, maybe we can just buy tickets through Taipei. And because we're not getting out of the airport, we can transfer no problem. And so that was the first batch of tickets we bought. When we got to the airport in Beijing, I had not, like, you've been to the Beijing Capital International Airport. Mm-hmm. Imagine it empty. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, it is eerie how
very weird,
cavernous and weird that felt.
Yeah.
And so we're at the gate, and we're the only other flight that's boarding that day is a flight to Bangkok. And that flight was rammed, like a lot of Chinese people were just trying to get out of Beijing.
Yeah.
And Thailand was an easy place for them to get a visa for and to arrive at that point. And so we're standing in line for this Taiwanese airline, and like the airport manager comes down. So like this like old Beijinger comes down, and he points at me and at Robbie, and he says, "They can leave." And he points at Liu Fang and just went, "You can't leave. Taipei won't let you transfer." And she's like, "But I have a visa." He was like, "Your visa, his visa is fine. And then the little guy's visa is fine. Your visa is a piece of paper that I could give a shit about." And so there's a whole backstory of like geopolitical intrigue.
Yeah.
But my heart fell out, right? Because I'm like, because of course she turns to me and says, "Just take Robbie and I'll meet you in America." And I'm like, go to hell. There's no way that I'm going to get on this plane and hope for the best. Like,
Right.
we're either going to go back to our apartment knowing that we tried,
Yeah.
or we're going to get on a flight and we're going to get out of here. And so there was a flight to Tokyo. We were there. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning. There was a flight to Tokyo at 4. Because of the stuff that we had done with Baird Brewing in Japan. She had like a 5-year visa in her passport. The way that Japan was kind of filtering out people that would transfer through Japan to get out of China was that all China's flights were arriving at Haneda International Airport, and all outbound North American flights were leaving from Narita.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had to have a visa to transfer. There was no visa-free lane to go the 50 minutes across Tokyo. And so we were just fortunate that she was papered over in her passport. And so we booked that flight. And from the minute we got on the plane to the minute we landed in Haneda, I had like the longest panic attack I think I've ever had. And then we arrived in Japan, and they were just delightfully technocratic about it. They were just like, "Fill out all of this paperwork and let us scan you and pledge that you don't have COVID." And I'm like, guys, this is not gonna help. Like, everyone's gonna say that they don't have COVID.
I do solemnly swear I do not have the COVID.
I swear I don't have it. So we're cool.
Mm-hmm.
But
you
we filled out all of our
us,
stuff.
Would you?
We filled out all of our paper, and it was, it's $150 taxi ride to go from Haneda to Narita, or it's like a $3 train ticket. And I'm like, I'm not riding on the train. I'll pay the money.
Yeah.
It was the best $150 I had spent up to that point in my life. Yep. We got out of the taxi, stayed in a airport hotel, and then walked on to the flight the next day. While we were on the flight from Narita to Chicago, when we landed in Chicago, we got all these alerts, and Liu Fang got these travel alerts because she's registered with the Chinese consulate, saying all Chinese passport holders are banned from traveling through Tokyo as of like the 3rd hour that we were on the plane. So it was literally the last flight that we could have gotten to get all the entire family out of China. And then by the time we landed in Chicago, the customs and immigration guys were just delightful. And then there was like a CDC volunteer that, filled out our paperwork, did some contact tracing, file this away. Nobody's ever going to look at it. Took our temperature, and he could see that Robbie was a little anxious. And I get choked up every time I think about it. He gets down like on his knee. This old dude gets down on his knee and just looks at Robbie and just says, "You're safe now. It's okay."
Jeez.
And like, after all of that, like, the naive goodness that we have here that we take for granted, it was just overwhelming for me. And I've thought about that moment for 2.5, 3 years now, and every time it gets me, because it's like I took that little kid into China, in and out of China, hundreds of times in his 8 years on the planet. At that point, not being hyperbolic, how mobile we were, and how much I love traveling with Robbie. No one at arrival in any international airport in China ever said anything other than the equivalent of "next." It was just, all of the memories of just like curating this little soul through this chaotic miasma of China and Taiwan and Hong Kong and East Asia and Southeast Asia and North America and Europe. And like that volunteer getting down on his knee to just like look at Robbie eye to eye and be like, hey man, it's going to be okay. And it's knocked me through a loop ever since. And I know that there's shittiness here, man. I get it. But like there's the ability to participate, there's the ability to advocate for other people, and there's the desire or the willingness to just look at a little kid in the eye and just be like, hey man, it's going to be okay. And so like I wouldn't trade those moments for anything.
It's beautiful. I'm crying a little bit, to be honest. I mean, I love Robbie, and I can imagine how scared he would be going through all that and sensing, you guys are wonderful parents, but I can't imagine you wouldn't be a little worried. Yeah, I mean, but and just having a stranger sense that and talk to him warms
the
my
only
heart.
I think we've had a couple of moments like that, but for Liu Fang, it was when we went to get our first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. The way that they did it here was there was like the biggest public high school in that congressional district was like the hub, and everybody went. You had your appointment, you showed up. They like did like big batches of people all at once. You went into the gym. It was this whole thing. A lot of people were scared. A lot of people were excited, but there were like these off-duty cops that were volunteering to just like marshal people around and make sure everything was okay. And like he saw Liu Fang was pushing the stroller with Levy, and like my dad was with us, and he could tell that we were like a little family. And so like my dad got his shot first, and then Liu Fang got hers. And while I was getting mine, like the cop did a really similar thing, and he just went up to Liu Fang and he was like, you're doing the right thing. I know this is stressful. I'm really happy to see that you brought, your, what he assumed was her father-in-law. But like for her, it was just like the like, cops don't do that everywhere else in the world. Public health doesn't do that everywhere else. Like they asked her like consent before she got the shot, and she just kind of laughed. I was like, well, I'm here, aren't I?
Right.
Like they have to ask, because she was so used to just getting, jabbed with things, pushed into lines, told where to go. And so I think that I would put that on par with like the feeling of when we arrived with Robbie. It was just like seeing her feel like an independent sense of agency and freedom and all those things that like she just didn't have until, we kind of ended up here.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, take it for granted. It's pretty cliche, but
yeah, I mean, I don't tend to lose my patience when people, get conspiratorial or on either side, or like, rail against it or rant. Because that's also a beauty of our system that we're allowed, right?
Right.
Nobody's allowed to complain about it in China. And so here, like I, to an extent, I'll just kind of tolerate it. But usually, at the end, when they get it all out, I just tend to gently remind them, like, you're being asked to wear a mask into Target. It's not the fucking end of the world.
Right.
Just wear the mask. It's fine. You'll be all right.
Right.
Eventually, you will be out of Target and you can take the mask off. It's fine. You'll be all right.
You can wear any mask you want too.
Right.
You can have any message you want on it.
There you go.
Yeah, and so you guys made it safely, were welcomed, learned, and started living in Ohio.
By I think it was April 15th ish. China just kind of closed, like slammed the door shut.
Right.
Like whether you had a resident visa, their equivalent of a green card, unless you were a Chinese citizen, you couldn't come back to China.
Yeah.
And all visas are like summarily canceled. And so like even what I had in my passport wouldn't have been recognized.
Yeah.
And so it was an opportunity for them to just kind of like hit reset on who could come and go, how to control that population, ingress, egress. But it also kind of like that gave me a feeling of calm, because it meant like I didn't have to go back. Things there weren't getting any better. They were just getting more like systematized, and what they had been doing in like Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, with like tracking population movements and behaviors and social credit and all that stuff. It was just all kind of getting sped up and implemented nationwide under the guise of zero COVID.
Right.
And so when they said that I couldn't come back, I was more or less like, oh, shucks. Um,
Well, uh, this is a much less human way to articulate this, but I remember you texting me about the weather and saying when the lockdowns were so intense and the city had shut down so completely that it had snowed 3 times in a week in Beijing, and that it doesn't
right.
snow 3 times in a year usually, or even it snows once every 3 years maybe.
It's usually once every other year, once every 3 years, you'll get like snowfall, and it'll be so prolific that like the WeChat moments, like their version of Instagram would just be inundated with there's snow on this thing, there's snow on bicycles, there's snow on cars, and it's like yeah, there's snow, there's snow everywhere. But it was such a unique thing, up until 2019, 2020, that like it just was like a happening. But then not only was it snowing consistently in Beijing, but there were also like that wildlife was returning to cities,
Yeah.
right? And so there were entire photo threads on Weibo and WeChat of like bunny rabbits on the roads in Wuhan during the lockdown, or like look at all like there's this type of bird in Beijing that we haven't seen in the urban area for like the last 50 years. And so it was like that 12 monkeys or whatever nature was going to reclaim
Right.
the urban centers.
Yeah.
But like it was so efficient and so abrupt that even like wildlife didn't understand what was going on. Like, where'd all the people go? Is it safe for me to like wander into this concrete jungle that like I've no one in my lineage in the rabbit lore, no one's been in Wuhan in years and made it out to tell about it.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of saw these very like odd, I wouldn't call them positive, but like, nice, nice aftershocks of like these very weird, abrupt policy decisions. And so watching that from here was just like, we'd wake up, we'd have our calls, we'd either stay up or wake up early. We'd do all of our team discussions. Everything was signed remotely. Everything was approved remotely. Everything was done with us here and the management there. But then when we weren't working on like Great Leap stuff, it was just like, well, what's going to happen to like China?
Yeah.
Like, when are they going to reopen? And when they reopen, what's it going to be like for people to go back? Because it just doesn't like, I couldn't imagine what it could look like after this, because even in like normal times, the amount of change that happens in China is like whiplash. Like, if you're gone for a month or two and you come back, like there'd be entire neighborhoods that would look different, feel different.
Yeah.
New restaurants, old restaurants, gone. Like, everything would constantly be changing and remaking itself. And so if you had the ability to just like do it all at once, like, and like with who's in charge, like what's it going to feel like? Is it ever going to be the same, or is it just kind of going to be something completely different? And so that's kind of like where our minds went through that summer. Levy was born on July 1st. And so that was like an excuse to just kind of walk away for a couple of weeks and have, maternity and paternity leave. And then like by the time the end of the summer and early fall rolled around, it was pretty clear that like our commercial performance was a non-issue, because we weren't fully reopened at the brewery and all of our retail locations until like the end of July, beginning of August.
Mm-hmm.
So you literally just took a mulligan on like 6 months of commercial operations.
The whole country did at minimum.
The whole country
world
did, like at all of it. But there was no PPP. There was no like government programs. There was just, if you had money, you battered down the hatches, and if you didn't, you could take usurious debt and then suffer, or you could just throw in the towel, wait for things to blow over, and then try your hand at something new. And so we were seeing like a lot of chatter in the development zone where we had the brewery. We were in like WeChat groups with hundreds of other like general managers and employees, and like they were using these groups as ways to disseminate information from the government. But then you kind of started people getting a little stressed out. Usually you just like receive the edict and give a thumbs up, but like people were like, when can we reopen? Is there going to be any like tax forgiveness? Is there going to be any, like low interest debt available? Is there going to be anything at all? When you were going into like April and May, you could see that established companies were starting to show some cracks. And so we had just closed a round with our investors, and it was to just do like a big push into 2020, get the brand into new markets, sign as many distributors as we can, move. And then when things slammed shut, it was like, well, we have this money and we don't want to do a redundancy round. We don't want to like get rid of this team that we built. And so we'll just tough it out until, Q3, Q4, when that money would, theoretically start to get a little depleted. They started like giving the like high sign of like, well, are you going to go back to China? And I was like, well, I technically can't, but I've renewed my work visa or my work permit because I could do that through the consulate here. And I can apply for a new visa if you want me to go back. And they were like, well, we need to raise more money and we need to do this and we need to do that. And we want you to hire like a new CFO who's like a guy that they had chosen and I had never met him. And so like the decision that Liu Fang and I made was they're signaling very heavily that they want me to go back. I don't want to cause more problems. I don't know this guy that they want me to hire. So I'll go back and we'll figure it out. And you guys stay here. I'll go back and it'll be fine. And so I got my visa in November. Flights were incredibly difficult to book because there was only like two flights from the continental US to mainland China like a week. And so you could fly from like LA to Guangzhou on a weird day, or you could fly from San Francisco to Shanghai. Like they went on the same day. And it was like Tuesdays and Thursdays or something. It was a very weird schedule. And I was like, well, I don't want to go to Guangzhou. I don't know anybody there. There was a flight to Beijing, but I had to route through some weird place. I don't want to like you started hearing like when people get back to China, if they have COVID, then they get taken away. And I'm like, ugh, I don't want to get taken away. That sounds like it sucks. I don't, but I know if I get taken away, in Shanghai, it's probably a little bit nicer than getting taken away in Beijing.
Or Guangzhou.
So, right. And so we'll do the flight to Shanghai. We booked
There might
the
be neon in the one if you get taken away in Shanghai.
In Shanghai, they treat you like a star.
Yeah.
No. So like I booked a flight for December 12th. I think arriving on the 13th, you lose a day going back. And so the way to do it was also very like bureaucratic. You had to have a negative antibody test, which was weird because if you had antibodies, it means you had COVID, but you beat it, and now your immune system was strong. But they wanted like if you had COVID at all ever, you weren't allowed back. So you had a negative antibody test and then a negative PCR test within 24 hours of flying. And so I'm doing the math and I'm like, that's like impossible because there were no instant PCR tests in like anywhere in America other than like one lab in LA and one lab in New Jersey. And I think it was like Jersey City is where I had to drive.
Beautiful
to.
Jersey.
So we had to like
drove to Jersey
sit down
City.
with like we had to like do a Rand McNally map. It was the weirdest shit. We had to like sit down with an atlas and we had to be like, all right, we're here. And we can get a negative antibody test on our way out of Ohio. And then we can drive through the night. And I can be the first one in line in Jersey City. And that takes 90 minutes. And once I get that, I'll have like a 3-hour window before I have to board the flight in Newark to fly from Newark to San Francisco. And then I'll be able to get on the flight in San Francisco to go to Shanghai with like 87 minutes to spare or whatever, right? It was just this very convoluted
trick shot of COVID testing.
If everything lines up, I should be able to get on the plane. And so it was one of those really sad 2 or 3 day buildups because I didn't understand why I needed to go back. We had grown through like the period from when we could reopen and start distributing beer to that day. We had shown like positive growth through the most shit commercial environment you could imagine.
Yeah.
And the team had crushed it and everything was what we always dreamed of. It was transparent. It was positive. It was about team. there were team leaders and team members. There weren't like bosses and employees. It was like this whole thing that we had wanted to build, and it was working.
Sound like a hippie.
But I also understood that like there was a lot of other people's money invested in that project, and if I'm not there, whatever, right? Then people are gonna. And so, you know, I just remember waking up on like the 10th or the 11th, and I was just like, you know, I made breakfast for Liu Fang. Robbie was still in school. We were making this plan to do this like cross, you know, 3-state sprint to the airport type thing. And I was just washing the dishes, and I just started to cry. I was like, I don't know why I need to do this. It's the most irresponsible, dangerous thing that you could ask anyone to do. And there's no reason to do it. It's just to see if I do it. And it just felt like no matter what, I was going to miss my daughter's first Christmas, my son's first Christmas in America, and as like living in America, going to public school, doing the deal. I was going to leave my wife, who didn't have a driver's license or a green card at the time, with my dad lives in the house next door. And I'm going to throw myself across the world and expose myself to what and why. And I didn't get it. And I was like, but I need to do it, because it's always in the back of your head as an entrepreneur that like just one more sacrifice and it'll work out. One more thing, one more pound of flesh, you'll be all right. And so we did the drive. And I remember right before they dropped me off at Newark Airport, we found like chicken nugget, whatever restaurant, drive through, found a parking lot that was like the parking lot of a public golf course in New Jersey somewhere. And we sat there. My dad drove with us, and it was me and Liu Fang and my dad and Levy in her car seat. And I just felt like this. I got out of the car. I took Levy out of her car seat, and I walked like, 100 yards away. And it just like the wind blew her little tuft of hair into my face. And I was like, this whole thing is fucked. This doesn't need to happen. And I just stood there and cried with my daughter, because it was like, why am I doing this? But like everything was already in motion. This guy was waiting for me in Shanghai. After you arrive, you do like 14 days in a hotel. They test you one last time, and then you're allowed to stay in the city of arrival for 7 days, and then you can travel freely. So I was going to have like 7 days with this guy. And I was like, I'll just make it work. I don't know him. I know he's just going to be the, representative of the investors, and they're going to want to make a bunch of changes, but we've come this far. I'll just make it work. And I'm just shoving everything away and just with blinders on them. I'll just do it. It's fine. And so board the flight, do the, cross state thing to San Francisco, stayed in whatever airport hotel, back at the airport the next morning, an hour or two to spare. My health code comes in from the Chinese consulate in New York as okay to fly. They scan it at the ticket, whatever, boarding pass issuance. I go through security. I get on this flight. And like, I just remember sitting there for 12 hours, just like, what the hell am I going to walk into? What's this going to be like? I read as much as I could. I watched videos of people that had been through the airport arrival in China within like the last couple of weeks. I kind of knew what to imagine, but like when we landed and I got out of the plane, and everybody was in that head to toe PPE, and everything was cordoned off, and everything was closed, and everybody was just jammed into little groups. I just had this like feeling in my stomach of like, this isn't going to go well. Like, I'm going to meet this guy. It's going to be evident that it's like time for me and Liu Fang to move on. They're going to want full control, whatever. Right. It just didn't feel right.
Right.
And so got through all of that. A shuttle took me to the hotel. We had other investors from Hong Kong who were, friendly with us at the time. And so one of the reps from that, one of the reps from that fund had like arranged for me to be put in a nicer quarantine hotel. Some of them were really drab, but this one was like, they opened it for the World's Fair in 2010. It shut down, and then they like repurposed it for like COVID quarantine. So it was like a dusty old
like Olympic Village style hotel.
4.5 star, who gives a shit, Starwood Alliance Hotel or whatever.
Right. Did you get your points?
Yeah, sure, man. I'm sure they're sitting somewhere waiting for me to claim them. But, I get in, some old man in PPE, like takes my temperature,
makes me fill out paperwork for the 1,000th time, makes me scan a QR code to fill out paperwork online for the 1,000th time. And then he kind of like leads me to the elevator, gives me a key, and I'm on like the 27th floor by myself. And, first night was fine. Downloaded a bunch of Audible books on tape and TV shows that I wanted to catch up on. 14 days is a long time type of a thing. First couple of days went by without a hitch. And then on my third day, my China phone rang, and that phone never rings. And it was a Shanghai number. And I answered it, and the guy on the other end in Mandarin said, you tested positive on arrival. We need to start the contact tracing process, and we're going to send somebody to come and get you. And I was convinced it was a joke. And so I was just like, hey, in Mandarin, I just said, I don't really know that, I don't recognize this number. Can I get your WeChat? And then I can put you in a group with my HR director, and then we can figure out what's going on. And he was like, yep. But you don't have to give me, I'm not going to give you my WeChat. I'll just add, I have your WeChat, so I'll just add you. And I was like, oh, cool. And so I did a group with her, with our HR director and my wife and this guy. And it was very clear what he was saying. An ambulance was coming to pick me up in 90 minutes, pack all my shit, and do what I was told. And so they claimed that even though I tested negative on arrival with the instant PCR test that they made me do, they claimed that they retested it and it was a weak positive. And so I needed to be under quarantine and observation to make sure that yada, yada, yada. So that ambulance arrived, two very large men in PPE that were roughly my size, knocked on my door. And I kind of chuckled to myself that they had to find the two Manchurian dudes that lived in Shanghai and worked in public health to come and like get me, because these guys were clearly sent because I was large.
Right. Guys from ET coming to get you.
And so, the first day was kind of a blur. They took me to a triage hospital where they retested me. But like it was me, the ambulance that came to got me, dropped me off alone in a parking lot. Administrator came out, gave me more paperwork to fill out, and then just told me to wait outside. And it's like winter in Shanghai. It's not a cold city, but it's humid and it's like, 45 degrees outside. And they just kind of left me outside for 4.5 hours. And there was another woman there that was on my flight who was Chinese. And so we just kind of like kept our distance from one another and commiserated in the cold. It was fine until like the sun started to go down. And then we were just kind of like outside in the dark for another hour before they came to get us. And then they made me do a CT scan and did another PCR test, which was so invasively aggressive. They took a bunch of blood. Immediately came out and told the woman I was with that she was positive, and it was an aggressive infection. But then the head pulmonary whatever doctor came out, said that like there was a little spot on my lungs, but it could be bronchitis because I have chronic asthma. But they're going to keep me overnight and they'll test me again when I arrive at the triage hospital's dormitory, and then I'll get the results in the morning. And if it's negative, I can leave and go back to the hotel. But if it's positive, they're going to send me to what they called like a quarantine hospital. And so did the dormitory, no shower, and no seated toilet, like a squatty potty and a sink, and no food, but I had like Cliff Bars, just kind of like tossed and turned on a very hard bed, and talked to Liu Fang all night about, how fucked this was. And then like the little intercom in that room just started screaming at me at like 7 a.m. to take my temperature. I took my temperature, and then they said, okay. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm on my way out. And then a woman just kind of like barged in and said, why aren't you packed? And I said, because no one told me to pack. And she just said, well, you're still positive. You're going to Jinshan Medical Detention Center. Ambulance is downstairs. Everyone else is waiting. Pack your shit. You're leaving. And so I got in an ambulance with like 5 other people, all looking very uncomfortable that we were all in the same ambulance. So up until this point, I was just isolated by myself. and then they took me to the Jinshan quarantine hospital and put me in a room with 2 other people, and I was there for 31 days. And everything that any of your listeners have read about what's happening to people in Shanghai who test positive and they get taken to places like this, it's all true. They don't turn the lights off. The hygiene is like really bad. There's cockroaches everywhere.
They're giving you like 1,000 calories of food a day, right?
I was on an 800 calorie a day diet. I lost 41 pounds in 30 days. I wasn't in like a big communal space with a bunch of cots. I was in a tiny little room that was built for 2 people, and there were 3 people in there.
Yeah, it was like reading what you wrote. It was like 75, 76, and in the middle it was like plus 36 or something.
Yeah, plus 36 was always the funny one.
It's like an area code for some European country.
Well, they never said that it was they never said our names. It was just the bed numbers. And so they always, like, while I was in there were 5 people that kind of cycled through. And if they were nice, I was in the bed that was like farthest away from the door up against the window. If they didn't have to put somebody in the middle bed, they didn't, which I appreciated. But it was clear that the room was made for 2 people. And then they just had to add beds because, a lot of the people that were in that detention hospital weren't necessarily international travelers. There was like a foreign wing, and then there was a local wing. And by the time I was released 31 days later, like the entire foreign wing, I was the last foreigner to be discharged, and the entire foreign wing were also like local infections. And so like, it was just kind of like a peek into, if I was reading my diary, I would be like, oh, how interesting. But like actually living through it, it was, it was something that I would not wish on anyone else. And like I said in that diary, and that, for everybody listening, the diary that Mike and I are referring to is something I wrote right after like the first couple of days I got out of the hospital. They took me back to a 14-day hotel and made me do another 14 days quarantine. So I had a lot of time to write. And so I wrote a diary just to get it all out. And so I didn't really have to like strain to remember what happened. I just put it all down on paper, and then I just kind of kept writing and wrote the base of like a book about, how I ended up in that room.
Yeah.
What brought me to China and everything.
It was published on Substack, and there'll be a link in the description that if you guys want to read it, and I suggest you do. It's pretty incredible.
So like James Fallows posted it on his Substack because he's become a close friend. And he was at the Atlantic forever. And he used to live in China.
He wrote about you in like 2010 about beer, right?
He was so enthusiastic that somebody finally opened a craft brewery in Beijing. He was like the first international press we ever got. He wrote about us on the Atlantic Online. And so he and I have been pen pals ever since. But when he encouraged me to just like let it sit for a year, and then he published it, I don't know, 3 months ago, pretty much like a couple of weeks before Shanghai shut down. But he wanted me to like write an updated forward to it. And it was very much about like, I get that what I went through is not the worst room you could be in. There are people in worse cages. But it really brought to light like the approach that governments like mainland China take to dissent or problems that are not easily fixed.
Yeah.
And so, the situation in Xinjiang and the situation in a lot of other places in China are, I think, becoming more and more believable, even though there's a lot of time and PR energy spent to try to make it sound like a hoax. But like I lived through a situation that isn't even like the tip of the iceberg of how badly people in those circumstances are treated.
Right.
And it's like they were trying to help me, right? Like,
right.
That, like I'm pretty
you were lucky to be in the place you were, right? That's what one of the people said to you.
Well, everybody that treated me, I knew that they genuinely were trying to take care of me, even though the way that they expressed their care and stewardship was brutal to people that are raised not in that environment.
They called you fat a lot, didn't they?
I was reminded constantly that this is like a 5-star medical facility. You're lucky to be here. And so it was clear that in their mind, what I was going through was care. But in my mind, what I was going through was sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and being subjected to circumstances and environments that are unpleasant at best, but are extreme expressions of control that are designed to remind you that, you're not a unique snowflake. You're
your healthcare is not it's not based on who you are. It's based on what you're supposed to be and how we control you.
Like the details of like that experience, if people are curious, they can read about it. But it's as bad as you would imagine. It's exactly the circumstances that I was terrified of coming to fruition when I felt like I was being kind of coerced to go, or encouraged to go back to a China that was, going through some changes. And like the mindset on, day 16 or 17 was it's over. Like my journey in China is coming to an end.
A place you would live for 16 years.
The feeling of, being in a room, not being able to talk on the phone, not being able to video chat, missing, Christmas and New Year's. And I mean, everything hit me like heavier and heavier. And like it was a sacrifice too far, for, what was waiting for me in America. There was, beautiful life that was, wanting to see their dad again. And there was Liu Fang wanting her, partner back. And, it didn't matter how much it hurt. And it didn't matter the realities of what we started and what we grew. And, how we needed to start over from scratch, in a place that I ran from for my entire adult life. Like none of that mattered. All that mattered was I needed to come home. And we would make it work, because if you can build what we built in the environment that we built it, then we can make something even more beautiful in a place that is a little less, reminiscent of a meat grinder. So, the decision to come home was a quiet one. I talked to Liu Fang. Only a handful of people even knew I was in there. We couldn't afford to let rumors get started that the owner of Great Leap had COVID, because no one would look for the context. They would just assume that I had been licking every can at the brewery up until the government discovered that I was spreading COVID, and then I got taken away. Zero. And so we kept it as quiet as we could. And most of my employees didn't know. The plan was that I was going to surprise them for Chinese New Year after my quarantine in Shanghai was over. But the minute I got locked up, it was clear that, the health code contact tracing program in China is not kind to people who have had COVID. And so you would be the first one that they would suspect if there were new cases in an area that didn't have cases before. And so even though I had a green QR code when I got out of that last hotel quarantine, the only thing I wanted was to get the paper I needed to get on a plane and leave. The funny part is that you get like a 30-day on arrival visa when you're going to China to renew your resident card, which is what I was doing. And mine expired while I was in this government hospital, and they fined me for overstaying my visa.
Oh my God.
And so when I got out of that hotel, the second quarantine hotel, I had to go to the police station and pay a fine, and then
you were in
special
there
permission.
So you're there for 31 days, and you need 2 more weeks in a hotel before you could leave, correct?
Yeah, plus the 3 when I first arrived. So I was like in quarantine for like 48, 49 days.
Jeez. Well.
So once I got my visa, I paid my fine and got my visa renewed. I was, United Airlines also required that I get a PCR test so before
So
I
you
get
had
on
to
the
drive
plane.
to
So
Jersey City, drive back to China, and then get on the
sure.
plane.
I think I was on PCR test number 48 at this point.
So your nose is just raw.
Well, I mean, I had hemorrhaging in my nose when I was in that hospital, and they blamed it on me being fat. I was like, I think it might be because you're jamming a fucking stick in my nose every morning at 5 a.m.
They blamed
Anyway.
everything on you being quote unquote fat, right?
Yeah, it's a theme in the diary. It seemed to have stuck in my mind that I kept testing positive for 31 days because I was fat, and the COVID virus stays in your fat cells.
Sure.
I was like, you're
The
just
fat cells
trying
in
to
your
work
nose.
the word.
Yeah.
You're trying to work the word fat into each sentence as much as possible.
And for the people who can't see you, no one can see you but me. But you're not a fat man. You're a very or a bigger guy, but you're not fat. Like you're Midwest. You're Midwest normal.
I asked in a moment of irritation and impatience. I had tested negative twice, and then the next day reverted back to positive, and those were the particularly like stressful times.
Yeah.
And so when it happened the second time, I very aggressively asked, "Why am I still here?" And the doctor responded with, "Because you're fat." And then I said, "My clothes don't fit anymore. That excuse isn't working as much as effectively as it was 4 weeks ago."
Right, because to get out of that 31 day, you had to test negative 3 days in a row. Is that right?
So yeah, I mean, you had to test negative twice within basically 48 hours. But the first test, they tested it at the hospital lab, and then the second test had to be sent offsite to like the Shanghai CDC national lab. And so like you would get the false negative, and then they'd come and do a PCR test the next morning, and then they'd send that offsite. It wouldn't come back until the following day. So you had like a whole 36-hour period where you were like, I'm getting out of here. And then they come back on the follow-up with, well, oh no, you're positive again. And so like that was more like, that felt like a psychological
Red from Shawshank, not even caring that you're on parole anymore.
Well, the first time it was just emotions, right? Because I was, it was 15 or 16 days in. I was like, all right, this isn't that bad. I'm going to go and do another 14 days. Maybe I'll still meet with this guy. Maybe I'll still make it up to Beijing. But like when they came back and said, you're positive, like I had a breakdown. That was when I decided I can't do this anymore. And then like a week later, it happened again. And at that point, like all of my emotional capital was spent, and I was just mad. And then like my roommates at that time were two local patients. One was from the Shanghai area. The other one was a migrant worker that was kind of caught in a dragnet type thing and ended up in this hospital. But like at the end of the day, it was like I was worried that if I lost my temper and started yelling at the medical staff, that those two guys would take it out on me because like I'm a ungrateful guest or whatever. Mm-hmm. But to my surprise, they were just like, yeah, like, you're torturing this guy. They literally just started yelling at the doctor about, because I was their worst nightmare, that they were going to end up being in there for 4 weeks or whatever it was at that time. And so like the entire experience was enough, right? You can put things aside when you've created like a sub community and a subculture that is, worth working for and reminds you of like why you're there. But when all of that is just stripped down to nothing and you're laid bare, it wasn't a difficult decision to just say, I'm done. I can't, it can't be done anymore. Yeah. And like, I can't continue to sacrifice, what really, really matters, even though, at times Liu Fang and I viewed Great Leap as one of our children and like as a big family of people that we love. But at the end of the day, you have to remember why you're like, what are you working towards? You're working towards, the ability to be an example to your kids. And like, when they come to you one day and say, Dad, I had this complex problem. What am I supposed to do? At least, that like when you had a complex problem, you either made a mistake or you did the right thing, but you can
look at them and say, well, this is what I did. Now, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And like, if Robbie ever came to me and asked me that question, and my response is, well, I chose to continue to like stay in an environment that kept me away from you, and I missed like immensely important milestones in your life for commercial realities. Like I mean that I feel like they made it easy for me to kind of divorce ourselves from like that dream and to move on.
Yeah.
Because I think, China is always going to do what it wants to do, regardless of how many people think that they can go and like change it or influence it or inspire it or whatever, or find themselves in some eat, pray, love context. But like we took our swing and we did an immensely
an incredible
meaningful thing and have absolutely no regrets. But I'm not going to look at my son and say, when it came down to it, I chose that over you every time. I want to be able to say, everybody has a limit, and when I reached my limit, the only thing I wanted to do was to be back here with you guys. And so that's why I'm sitting in a backyard in Lake County, Ohio.
It's beautiful, Carl. I mean, you often hear the stories of these people who don't make that choice, and we revere them and tell them to buy Twitter, and that's not where it's at. Where it's at is what you chose to do, and it's not many people actually have to make that choice, and not everyone would make the same choice you did, and it's part of the reason I continue to be so impressed with you and just inspired by you. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Hey man, anytime.
Anytime.
What
are you doing next week?
The next time I make a monumental life change, you'll be the first to know.
So what are you up to now?
When I was in that detention hospital, one of the things that Liu Fang and I did to like pass the time because they didn't take my phone away. It was just like, you can't make phone calls, you can't disturb the other people in the room type of a thing.
Yeah.
And so like texting is fine, email, text, whatever, anything silent was totally above board. And so she and I just like started doing like what we usually do. You fall into a rut. Let's look at commercial real estate websites. Let's look at 80,000 acre horse ranches in Wyoming.
Yeah.
Let's just look at the most absurd deep rivers, big open skies, mountains type shit. And so we were just like throwing links back and forth, looking at different properties and just kind of daydreaming. And then I typed in one of the commercial real estate sites, I just typed in the zip code for Cleveland, and the first hit was this like 100-year-old vaudevillian theater that was like, an entire city block, west side of Cleveland, West 117th and Lorraine type neighborhood. And the Variety Theater, just kind of a run of bad luck for like 40 years. City was kind of forcing the trustee committee that kind of controlled the grounds to like sell it and use whatever money to pay for the property taxes type deal. And so like I'm scrolling through like the 100 whatever listing pictures of this theater, and for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, for very obvious reasons, while I was in that hospital, like the idea of just like opening a arts hub where people could make really dangerous, beautiful, risky art, just like was like, that's what I want to do. When I get out of here and I get back to America, let's go and look at this theater. Let's see if we can use what we use or what we learned in China, type of a thing. I already kind of made the decision by the time I got into that second quarantine hotel that I was just, there was no pathway forward where there was like a healthy life for Carl if he like stayed the face of a brewery.
that he wasn't really going to be in control of anymore. And so, Leo Fong and I just kind of made the decision that like, no matter what happens, I'm going to have to resign and walk away. And so the idea of like going to this theater and just kind of like seeing it, like walking the main concert hall, and then look, there were a bunch of like retail storefronts and then like 13 apartments. It was like this massive complex. And so the idea of like doing that was very healing. Because it was just like, it's a problem to solve. And so got back, did 14 days of like self-quarantine at home, just decompressing. And then Leo Fong and I had decided, listen, Robbie's got to go to school, but I'm going to spend as much time with him during those 2 weeks as I can, or as that like he can handle. And then once I'm done, I get a 14-day whatever antigen test just to make sure I'm okay. We're gonna put Levy in the car and just drive to California. I want to see all the great expanse of the American West and just kind of start to heal. The thing that we did right before we left Cleveland was we finally got like the real estate agent to respond to us, and we went and took a look at that theater. And it was something that I just kind of like threw up against the wall for a couple of months after I got back. Buddy of mine's in entertainment in LA, and he's kind of like my bellwether for, yeah, we can do that, or Carl, that's a shitty business. You don't want to be involved in like booking a theater for AEG or whatever, or be vertically integrated into Live Nation or whatever that life is.
Yeah.
And so like I wrote a bunch of proposals, met the economic development commissioner of Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland is, met the executive director of the trustee committee that was like stewarding the property, became really close with the custodian of the theater, who was just the most delightful, 55, 60-year-old professional ticket seller for Ticketmaster or whatever. Just loved the theater, type of a really, gregarious, huge personality. And these guys had like heard so many bad proposals, and like you can kind of commiserate, right? It's a big space, let's put a brewery in there. Like they got all of these like craft breweries, we can rip the stage up and put their tanks in there type shit. And
the ceilings are real tall.
I just want to restore the theater and then like recruit friends that are like on the cutting edge of like culinary revivals in Rust Belt cities to like come and do concepts in the storefronts. And then we'll do a live house. We'll convert the apartments to creative agency spaces. And like, that was like the first proposal they got that wasn't, we're going to butcher it. We're going to put a fish tank in there. Like it was very.
We'll put the tanks on. We'll put the brew house on the stage. Like the brewers are the performers.
That's the show. Have you ever been to Church Brew Works in Pittsburgh? It's amazing. So, like, me just wanting to do something that was restorative, like, was a shot in the arm for these guys that have been trying to save this theater forever.
You wanted to restore something beautiful and creative in the middle of Ohio. Weird.
Sure. Crazy.
Didn't want to heal yourself at all, huh?
So like the one hindrance is, what ended up in America after everything that happened in China with nothing, right? Couple shekels of savings to kind of float us until I could get either consulting or whatever work lined up, after I decompressed from what happened. But it's not like I'm like, yeah, I got a pile of money. Let's make this theater cool.
Right.
And so it's just kind of like doing meetings, meeting people, running around, learning about historic tax credits, learning about, how you mosaic together a capital stack. I didn't know how to say any of those things.
I don't even know what that means.
So I didn't either. But apparently it's how you configure the mezzanine debt, the debt, grant, like soft money, and put together enough money to like get a project off the ground. So I'm like learning all of this stuff, like doing commercial things in America, which I've never done before. And it was just kind of cathartic. In the back of my head, I knew like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to save this theater because no one here knows who I am. And my story kind of sounds made up. Like, Carl, I built breweries in, what's the farthest place away? China? Yeah, I built breweries.
Where's no one going to check anymore?
and now I'm back here and I don't have any money. So you guys wanna do this? You wanna play ball? And so
Sure.
it was like,
But you're using the muscles, right? You're getting your muscles back.
right. So it was just kind of like testing the water, seeing if China was a fluke or if what Liu Feng and I learned there could be kind of used to do something here. The executive director of the trustee committee for this theater, wonderful human, fourth generation CEO of like a large format steel fabrication company in Cleveland that bends metal in the, like, they literally have equipment that could bend the face of God. I've never seen anything like that in my life. And my generation was raised to believe that like that type of industry doesn't exist in Cleveland anymore.
Right.
And that it's all in China now. Right. And so like, going to this guy's office, pitching him this theater deal, but also being like, I've been to a lot of metal fabrication places in China. I know what you do here.
Mm-hmm.
Like you weld metal together, right? Like you're like, you've got pyramid rolls, you've got press brakes, you're doing like large format stuff. He was like, yeah. I was like, do you ever do anything in stainless steel? Like this is maybe 4 or 5 meetings in after he had gotten to know me a little bit. And he was like, no, we do stainless and we do specialty metals at a subsidiary that we own. And I was like, well, do you ever do like brewing equipment? And he was like, no, we look at the market every couple of years. We can't compete with China on price, and we don't have anybody in our network or in our ecosystem that knows anything about that. And it was just kind of like, well, like if I put together a 1-pager, would you read it? And he was like, yeah, man, like, just whatever you think we might be able to work on together. He had enjoyed hearing me talk passionately about a theater that I found when I was in a jail. And so he was like, maybe if we got you something in your wheelhouse, it would be a little bit more feasible.
Yeah, we got an ex-con program of making new tanks.
Right. And so it turns out that like he had also started a subsidiary in India that was aiming at doing what they do in America, but for like East Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. And that had like come to an abrupt end. And so like he got my story very quickly because he himself had to sunset something that he really believed in. And so when I brought him this idea of like, hey man, if we were to build like one type of fermentation vessel that a certain subsect of craft breweries all need, but all have to wait like 30-week delivery times for, but we can just focus on like one thing and do it quicker. Would you be interested in getting into that business? And his reaction was overwhelmingly enthusiastic. And he and I were down at the subsidiary or the division that did all stainless, titanium, Inconel, high nickel alloy, like, anti-corrosion stainless steel stuff within a couple of weeks. And, the feeling of actually like bringing fabrication that had been offshored for an entire generation of craft breweries back to a place like Ohio, like you've got like large format tank fabricators like Interfab and Mueller and Sprinkman in America. But like the idea of trying to make America competitive with like Chinese stainless steel for that micro brewery segment of the American craft brewery market has been something that I think, because I'm so familiar with how China fabricates their tanks and what their weaknesses are in delivery times, in quality control, and in customer service, like he saw that as, at least worth hearing me out. And then he and I have, established a deeper friendship based on shared experiences, but also based on this like irrational love that we have for like Ohio and Cleveland and bringing like fabrication and manufacturing back to, back to communities that haven't seen that in a very long time. And so, that's been a very healing experience. Going to CBC for the first time as like not a brewer was very weird this year. I was up in Minneapolis for the CBC and I was like more just a guy, right? Yeah. I used to be like, oh, China Carl's here. And, like I stopped, I had a
Cleveland Carl.
I had like a walk and talk with John Mallet, but I wasn't like Carl from China talking to John Mallet. for everybody around me, I was just some guy,
Right.
right?
Sure.
So
Yeah. Trying to
there was
hawk a tank
comfort.
to the.
There was like a comfort of the anonymity of not having to be a brand or a persona, but it was weird. It felt, it definitely felt like something had been amputated, but it also felt like, new things were growing in its place, and like, the last year has been very, healing and good for all of the things that had kind of been debited away from me because of what we tried to do in China.
Yeah.
But like now it feels like there's a credit, right? There's something that we can build here that might last a little bit longer, and bring the same amount of like identity and agency and meaning to a community of people that kind of get forgotten in the conversation of like greater America, but also the overall like idea that manufacturing is dead and America is a service economy now. I don't think that's necessarily true, and China is giving us an opportunity to bring a lot of that fabrication and a lot of those dollars and keep them here, which I think is a worthwhile thing to try to do a feasibility on.
And that project is intended to build like 30s, 60s, 90s, 120s. Is that the?
Yep. No. So we've got two 90-barrel cylindrical conical fermenters that are, dimple jackets are on, manways are cut. We're ready to sleeve into the outer shell and then do the installation. But from going from nothing to prototypes was, in a large privately owned American metal fabrication company was, a very interesting challenge of seeing like how maneuverable that type of a vessel could be in reaction to, again, like a very Rasputin type character that parachutes in out of nowhere and convinces the owner to build things.
Yeah,
like,
next to his bind and puts him in a trance to build these.
The initial reaction to Carl from wherever was, that dude's crazy, get him out of the office. But the partner, the owner of the fabrication partner, was very patient, and he and I are very excited to see the one tank's going to live at Haymarket at their production facility in Bridgman, or so Pete says. And then Garrett is taking.
He's a big listener, so I'm sure he's going to hear this and respond to you now.
Sure, yeah, no, he's a huge fan.
Knows how to work a podcast for sure.
He's like, when are they going to get to talking about rosés? And then Garrett at Pipeworks is going to take the other 90, and that'll be, tell us what's wrong with them, and get us some data. Let's see. We're oversizing the dimple jackets. We want to be able to provide like quicker turnarounds for crash cooling. We're 35% headspace. All of the things that like a 3-inch port on the true drain at the cone. So when you're doing a really aggressive dry hop, you're not having to do magical things to try to get your yeast slurry through that 1.5-inch or 2-inch outlet.
Right.
Just like practical things that me and the brain trust that are working on this that I put together from various aspects of the craft beer community have all kind of whiteboarded and said, when I was doing this, I really wish that the tank I was working on had this. So having like a fabrication partner that's very responsive to that is cool, because there was just kind of like a cookie cutter mold for a lot of the that format and that size of fermentation vessels for a very long time. You just kind of got what was rigged off of that shipment from China, and you just made it work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot of peers that we've been inspired by that are doing like really high quality stainless fabrication in America and have been for years. But I think it's time to try to take a bigger bite out of that export market from China to here, and try to see if we can't just kind of focus on one widget and make it with turnaround times that won't make you sad when you hear how long it's going to, if you hear 24 to 30 weeks is a sad number.
You start doing how many turns is that? Yeah.
Less than that would be less sad, and so I'm aiming for less sad.
If people,
I like brewers to be less sad.
so obviously you guys aren't in production full scale yet, but if people listening to this believe in you and believe in the story and are interested in what you're doing, can they contact you somewhere, or is there
Yeah,
are you not there yet?
Western Reserve tanks.com is the website.
Mhm.
And so it's just a splash page with a contact page, and so you can feel free to like send us an email and let us know what you're looking to do in terms of expansion. And then, obviously it's about growing, right? We want to be able to grow into being a very reliable fabricator for a very focused scale of tank. But we're very hopeful that people will kind of understand what we're trying to do and will grow with us, which is why we're enthusiastic about our first two strategic partners. And then, the word of mouth and, the proof in the pudding type mentality that we use to build Great Leap is something that I really believe in. I can talk about how awesome something is, or I can just give you something that's awesome and then you'll know it's awesome. And so I think that that's kind of the vision and the direction that we're looking at for growing that business. But yeah, I mean, it's been very, very interesting to like apply what we learned building things in China and trying to implement like systems and approaches to problems that way in like American fabrication environments. And so far, no one has like tried to kill me, which I think is a good sign.
That's definitely a good sign.
I do bring donuts to the shop whenever I go down, and I think that helps. Whenever
donuts go a long way.
Hear me out. Have another donut.
Yeah.
Hear me out.
Well,
what if we made it taller? Hear me out.
What about more?
What about more better?
And then
let's make it more better.
What about Lu Fang? What is Lu Fang up to?
So Liu Fang, while I was in, so I'm not trying to like walk everything back to that detention center, but while I was in there, Liu Fang was staying up late her time, so I wasn't alone during the daytime, my time. And so the way that she would pass the time while she was chatting with me was she was like learning how to make snack format, Chinese style snack formats that her grandfather and grandmother made for her when she was little, and then that we enjoyed in like all the cities that we had traveled to. And so she just kind of got the bug to learn how to like, the steamed bun side of Chinese cuisine is underrepresented in America. And then like there's a massive environment of Chinese culinary like snack cuisines that are just not represented here at all because they're barely represented outside of the region in China. And so she's just kind of been like recreating a lot of these snack styles of like, flatbreads that are stuffed with different like formats of protein, steamed buns or pan fried buns that have all of these crazy different flavors that are either, very much like interpretations of Chinese flavors that Americans would be interested in trying in like a safe format, like a bun. And so Sichuan peppercorn heavy, a lot of fermented peppers, a lot of different types of spices and sauces with proteins that represent just how crazy abundant like our agricultural base is here, especially in Ohio, but in America on a whole. And so she's just kind of created this entire restaurant concept. She calls it abundance because in a very cute way, abundance breaks down to a bun dance. And so we were all very proud of her coming up with that very creative name. And so she's been doing pop-ups for about 7 months. And then she's been invited by Larder, which I think a lot of your listeners know. Jeremy Umansky wrote the book Koji Alchemy, and he's been kind of at the forefront of like koji fermentation and koji pickling renaissance in America. And so he's got his brick and mortar restaurant in Cleveland. It's called Larder Delicatessen. Amazing. If you're ever coming, when you come, I will take you there and we will eat delicious food. But they're closed on Mondays and Sundays and Mondays. And we've become really close with Jeremy and his wife, Allie. And they've very generously offered Liu Fang a residency on Mondays at Larder for like the next year until she gets her own space built. And so she will be doing a weekly pop-up at Larder in Cleveland, in Hingetown, every Monday from 11 until she sells out of food. And it'll be
So 11 until 11:15.
It'll be pan-fried buns, these spiral, flaky, croissanty flatbreads that are stuffed with amazing things called subing, and then one meat main and one veggie main, and then a Chinese dessert. And the menu will change. The fillings of the snack formats will change every week, and then the meat main and the veggie main will change every week just to keep things new and exciting. And so I have a lot of faith that the foodie community in Cleveland is ready for a modern take on authentic Chinese cuisine. And I'm going to do for her what she did for me in China, which is I am going to support her and be super proud when she blows everybody away.
Well, and that can be found at Abundance Culinary on Instagram, correct?
Yeah, at Abundance Culinary is her Instagram page with all of her food-related deliciousness represented in two-dimensional form.
I can vouch they are incredibly delicious buns. I've had some.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Strong Mike vouches for Carl and Liu Fang. That's the theme of this.
Took us a while to get there, but yeah, I think I can
we
finally
took a very long route.
I just wanted to say I vouch for you guys.
We took a very indirect route to get to Mike saying, these guys, they're all right.
Yeah, buy a bun or two, maybe, if you got time.
Buy a bun or two.
Well,
Treat
Carl,
yourself.
thank you for telling us your story. I've read your story, but thank you for coming on and talking with us. Is there anything else that you want people to know?
Don't take anything for granted. Enjoy every day and listen to this podcast as often as you can.
Thank you, Carl.
Smash that like button.
Yeah, smash
subscribe.
Yeah. Perfect.
Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.